Okay, so I didn't make an announcement that I was going to go live, so I just figured I would do this anyways. And then if somebody watches this later, it's all good. I wanted to share a couple of quick thoughts here about what's happening over in the UK right now. I'll give you a quick backstory and then why, as investors, this is important to understand because I think there's often blurred lines between politics and the markets, and I think that sometimes it'd be confusing to understand the immediate impact, how that impact starts to push into other areas. So I just want to call it out. This won't be a long video, but I think it's important to have at least an idea of what's happening right now, what is likely to happen, and what are the uncertainties we should be aware of. So, in its simplest form, here's what we have. The Prime Minister of the UK, Boris Johnson, has stepped down. So, the big question now turns to okay, well, number one, what's going to happen to the near term markets? What happens to the currency markets? What's the risk environment going to look like? And then potentially, is this going to cause a power vacuum, a big issue internally? So, here's the nuts and bolts. Boris Johnson stepped down. This dude has been in complete turmoil for a long time. Whether you agree or disagree doesn't really dissuade from the fact that like it's been one controversy after another. There's been issues in and around COVID, handling of situations, misconduct, all kinds of embarrassment that's brought itself to the prime minister's office. So it's a big deal to be aware. There are a number of major players who are going to probably be vying for this role. And the good news, though, is it's not that big of a deal. This isn't really like a Republican versus a Democrat if you're here in the US. This is more of an internal, like, who's going to make sense, who's going to rise to the top of the party, and then how are they going to figure things out. And I'm going to explain this in a second. But essentially, just to reiterate, Boris Johnson was the leader of the Conservative Party. He was the UK's prime minister. He is no longer there. He has said he would stay in power until a new leader is selected. But the reality is, most really don't want that to happen. Now, the reason this is particularly important to us as investors, okay, and this is the primary reason I'm talking about this, is as an investor, this creates yet another layer of risk in a marketplace that's already getting smashed by issues with supply chains, shipping, access to materials. This is about having store shelves that are bare. This is also during an inflationary period where things cost more than ever. We know we're on our way towards and might hit a recession, if not already there. This also hits us from a US perspective because we're dealing with our own problems, and this is a big partner of ours. So this doesn't mean we need to be panicked. It just means we need to be aware that there's a lot of intricacies in between the way things work. Now, one thing to call out is that the Eurozone and the US are not really involved here. Okay. So keep that in mind. So, although things right now, from a political perspective, are very uncertain for the UK, the one thing that we want to probably keep our eyes on more than anything is number one, how are European markets going to be moving in the next couple of days? And once we start to see who's likely to either lead or likely replace in this role, get a feel for how markets react to that. Now, additionally, for those of you who are in currency markets and commodity markets, that's the place we're paying the most attention, right? So we really want to understand what is the impact going to be on the sterling? Is this going to cause issues or not? Now, here's the interesting thing, and this actually isn't too surprising if you're used to it, but if you're not, this might be. Both the sterling and their major markets gained on the news that Johnson was going to resign. And I think this speaks to the fact that folks are really genuinely sick of this. It's been a mess. It's been a controversy after controversy situation. So, what people want in terms of markets and currency pricing and just the overall economy is calm. We want things to be predictable. We are okay with up and down, but it has to be in a channel of expectation. Okay. It's a big deal to be able to ascertain what's happening, why it's happening, and be able to make some sort of prediction in the near term. So, what I think people are most concerned is, will there be further downward pressure if this doesn't come to a conclusion quickly and we figure out who's going to get in there? So that's a couple things I want to call out. But the other thing I will say is this. Unlike a Democrat versus a Republican perspective in the US right now, things are a bit different in terms of how things are looking over from the UK's perspective. The sort of central parties, so to speak. So if you think like center left for Labour and center right for Conservatives, those are their two major parties. They're not as different from an economic perspective as we often are in the US. So just something to call out there. Hey, Marcus from Debt Free Dad, I didn't notice you there, man. Thanks for jumping on. Also, by the way, I just want to call this out. I love Debt Free Dad's channel, so you should check that out. My final thought here is this. When we in the US especially think about politics, there's always this huge concern in and around the wide spectrum of a conservative versus a liberal, a Democrat versus a Republican, the economic policies of the two, right? We've got ultra conservative financial, and then we've got socially liberal over here. The good news is that more than likely what we're going to see here is a center left or center right. Those policies are actually not that differentiated and generally are focused in and around the UK economy in a very reasonable way. So if you have exposure to UK markets, UK companies, you're holding currencies or commodities priced in sterling, you're probably okay. All right. So keep that in mind. This is something to pay attention to. I'm not going to belabor the point. I just want to make it known to folks who don't always follow this that in usual cases to have a resignation or an ousting, there's a huge turmoil in the markets. The interesting thing here is no one seems that surprised. You can't have never-ending issues with the way you run your government and think that it's just going to end up being allowed to continue. So the good news is, um, it was a resignation. The markets have generally been okay. We don't expect it to be too crazy of a fight. There will always be some fighting, and the media will stir it up, but we don't expect it to be too crazy. So with that, I'm going to wrap it. It's a quick one, couple minutes. I appreciate you watching. If this is helpful to get perspective on sort of the politics and markets intersections, feel free to let me know. I'm happy to do these and talk about how we sort of see them and value them and tie them together. Otherwise, have a great rest of your day, and I'll talk to everyone soon. Thanks for stopping by, everybody.